Good morning. I am Dr. José Manuel Ramírez from Madrid, Spain. Thanks to the organizers of the 32nd European Systemic Functional Linguistics Conference. The purpose of this paper is to present and discuss a socio-cognitive research on valuation. First, I will locate the research historically. I will draw the theoretical framework, the analyzed corpus, the method based on constituents, and the most relevant results for the purpose of this paper. To integrate some inconsistent results, I will propose the notion of sphere of value as a possible solution. I will also propose a new definition of social value. Finally, following the results of the semiotic analysis of two histological drawings by Ramón y Cajal, I will point out a possible fifth sphere of value related to the transformation of reality. The reflection on values dates back to classical antiquity, to the debate between Protagorism and Platonism. As we know, Plato maintained that values are fixed, universal, objective ideas, and attributed to Protagoras the opposite position, the subjectivity of values. Actually, we do not know what the thesis defended by Protagoras was, because his texts were destroyed. However, his famous humanist dictum has survived. Of all things, the human being is the measure, a dictum that ponders our ability to measure reality, to value it, although it does not clarify whether this capacity is individual or collective, or both types at the same time. The dichotomy posed by Plato has been repeated in different forms in the history of philosophy. In the 19th century, Auguste Comte's positivism proposed an idealized model of science, a vision that excluded the mental, technoscience, dialogue, and valuation. Also in the mid-19th century, Marx and Engels proposed the theory of ideologies, which in its rudimentary version maintains that social and economic structures determine thought and language. Currently, linguistic and semiotic studies often observe a correlation between social and economic structures on the one hand and language on the other. However, the notion of ideology fails to explain valuation, a pervading phenomenon in language. Several philosophers have been influential in this research. I want to highlight the contribution of John Dewey, who in his 1938 essay, Theory of Valuation, pointed the way for a feature theory based on two pillars: a social anthropology that studies the social context of valuation, and a psychology that studies the mind, where the valuation occurs. Our social and cognitive approach coincides with John Dewey's perspective. The theoretical framework of the research is systemic functional linguistics and two of its developments, appraisal theory and social semiotics. Regarding appraisal theory, we observe that it deals with three categories of attitudinal appraisal. This theory identifies the judgment subdomain with ethics and the appreciation subdomain with aesthetics. Appraisal theory also considers the epistemic category, identified with the ideational function. I have integrated the contextual model into the research, a notion developed by Van Dijk. I share with Van Dijk the idea that the speaker or writer interprets the context of the communication in a non-deterministic way. I also understand the contextual model as a theoretical construct allowing the linguist to introduce any other element that may have influenced the communication. However, our socio-cognitive research pushes us to reflect on social values. The theoretical framework provides us with two somewhat vague definitions of social value. For Martin and White, valuations can be interpreted as institutionalized feelings. For Van Dijk, values would be shared mental objects of social cognition. The research results will encourage us to propose a more precise definition. This research maintains a functional approach and a pragmatic perspective. It is therefore located at the highest level of linguistic analysis, the contextual pragmatic, but at the same time at the lowest, or if you like, the deepest, because it also investigates emotion. I now understand emotion in its etymological sense as movement, mood alteration, and movement in response to stimuli that is oriented about preferences, models, and ideals. The analyzed corpus consists of 6 texts, all of them the work of Santiago Ramón y Cajal and related to science. In this paper, I am going to focus on the multimodal scientific article of 1888 in which Ramón y Cajal rejected the reticular theory and defended the autonomy of the neuron for the first time. In the following years, this concept led to the development of the neural doctrine, the current basis of neurosciences. I have started to develop a quantitative-qualitative corpus methodology based on the values of transparency, reliability, and replicability. This method is based on constituents in 4 stages of its development. Although methodologically it begins with the syntax, the method allows for the integration of all levels of analysis, from the phonetic phonological to the semantic pragmatic, since all the linguistic elements can be indicators of emotion, the movement of the mind and language, and therefore they can be markers of valuation. In the second stage, the contextual models are formed by a repertoire of well-defined constituents. This makes it possible to study the role that each constituent plays in the production of a text. In this way, it is avoided to mistakenly consider the correlations observed between the social factor and textual production as a deterministic cause-effect relationship. But I think that the most characteristic of the method based on constituents is its functional and not a prioristic approach to social values and ideology. In the third stage, social values are constituted by their valuations. They are treated as instruction schemes for the evaluations that actually take place. In the fourth stage, ideology is not proposed in an a prioristic way either, but it is delimited by the main constituents of the contextual model. Above all, social values, social representations, purpose, and setting. Here we see the draft of the visual synthesis of the contextual model. On the right, we locate the purpose of the communication. On the left, the setting. Next, the social representations of the event model, made up of the people and objects valued. And above, the social representation made up of the speaker or writer and the real or expected interlocutors. Higher, we place social values, the possible ideology, and other possible contextual factors. Most relevant results. The first is that there are heteroglossic resources in all texts, also in scientific and technoscientific texts. The second is that in all 6 texts, there are valuations of judgment and appreciation, also in the scientific research article. This result contradicts what was predicted by Comte's positivism. Likewise, I wish to emphasize that we have also found the expression of brief and intense emotional reaction in the scientific article. Ramón y Cajal begins by presenting the problem of nerve cells in understanding method used in the laboratory, but when he begins to describe the observed facts, he writes, "The lamellae appear on the section surface constituting a true tree of life." The author remembers the initial surprise, his emotional reaction to the spectacle of nerve cells that is offered before his eyes. The analysis and comparison of the 6 texts has allowed us to reconstruct numerous social values. In principle, we have tried to differentiate the types of social values according to various criteria. Through the indexing criterion, we see that values can be implicit in the evaluations or be lexicalized. At other times, values are not indexed in the text. That is, there are hidden values to our methodology, although they are visible in the comparison between texts. For example, we know from other visual and written texts by Ramón y Cajal his preference for realistic art and imitation. Another criterion for categorizing social values is their semiotic function. We think that social values can fulfill at least 3 different semiotic functions: productive, as models of attitudinal evaluation; autoregulatory, to regulate the semiotic production of the author; and motivating, linked to the purposes of a text. But other results are inconsistent with the theoretical framework. Regarding the appraisal theory, the speaker or writer not only aesthetically values objects, but also aesthetically values people. More relevant is that some values of objects are not aesthetic, but functional. We highlight that some social values are not shared by the social group. They are purely sensory and cognitive, like what we have called visual dissonance. It should also be noted that these values interact with each other. In the scientific article of 1888, for example, the functional appreciation of the staining method is at the service of the appreciation of nerve cells, which do not constitute a network, an appreciation that in turn is at the service of the search for truth. To solve these challenges, we need a conceptual element that can be applied to both people and objects, contain different concepts and criteria, and be organized in relation to other similar elements. We have proposed the notion of sphere of value, which is intuitively used in the realm of philosophy. Each sphere of value is usually named by a nominalization. Thus, to the three traditional spheres of value, epistemic, truth, ethics, good, and aesthetics, beauty, we add a fourth, which we may call functionality. The results also invite us to propose a new definition of social value. We see again the draft of the visual synthesis of the contextual model. A circle in red, the social representation constituted by the interlocutors. Let us remember that we have indicated that social values fulfill various semiotic functions, and that some social values are not shared by the social group. Thus, faced with the traditional dichotomy between objectivity and subjectivity of values, we have recently proposed to define them not as group social values, but as interactional social values, concepts produced and reproduced in semiotic social interaction and whose ultimate purpose is the normalization of semiosis, that is, the comprehension and production of meaning. We think, however, that there are more hidden spheres of value in our corpus. These spheres of value must correspond to types of semiotic interaction. We observe here the two histological drawings with which Ramón y Cajal illustrated his scientific article of 1888 and which represent his observations through the microscope. These histological preparations required a series of processes before observation: a selection of brain tissue, a section of these tissues using a microtome, and staining of the nerve cells using the Golgi's method with silver chromet. Umberto Eco distinguishes between the present entity, here the histological drawing, and the absent entity, here the represented nerve centers. In the case of the representation of the nerve centers, we have an intermediate entity, the histological preparation itself. Next, we have applied the domains of the visual grammar of social semiotics to the analysis of these two histological drawings. I sum up results and conclusions. A histological drawing was not the mimetic result of observing a sample. These are composite and synthetic images, which combine the mimetic representation of different samples and submit the whole process to the scientific method and methodology. The purpose of the two images is to facilitate in the mind of the observer the construction of a dynamic percept that stimulates attention to detail and represents the structure of the nerve centers. It offers an inventory of their cells and it suggests their disconnection. In short, between the absent entity and the present entity, there has been a complex transformation of the reality and the study. All of this transformation is explicit in the verbal text and could therefore be replicated by members of the international community of histologists of the time. This transformation of reality constitutes the very process of production of the visual text. Following these results, I think that a fifth sphere of value can be added to the scientific article of 1888. The core of this sphere of value may simply be identified as production. This sphere of value can be applied to the appreciation and judgment subdomains, depending on whether object transformations, people transformations, or transformative actions are valued. When this production is the result of a human agent that contributes novelty, we could call it creativity. When this creative semiotic product, be scientific, techno-scientific, artistic, or of any other type, has a profound effect on society, it can be categorized as innovation. In this aspect of innovation, we agree with the reflections of the sociologist of science, Javier Echeverría. In the case of Ramón y Cajal's histological drawings, we observe that the transformational sphere fulfills an autoregulatory function. It materializes in a creative visual product and, in the scientific context, radically innovative. This semiotic product interacts with the other four spheres of value, and it is at the service of the epistemic motivating sphere, under the principle of truth. We also may ask whether there are some cases of transformational verbal appraisal in our corpus. This is the first clause of the scientific article of 1888. That is the first clause of our corpus. Golgi's investigations on the texture of nerve centers have opened a new era of investigations whose end is not in sight. Following current appraisal categories, it was categorized as a case of judgment, social esteem, normality. With the interactional criterion, it will be a case of judgment, transformation, innovation, with an autoregulatory function of ethical politeness and a motivating function of the epistemic sphere, truth. Finally, allow me to indicate that in the analyzed corpus, in my opinion, and following the same interactional criteria, there may be other hidden spheres of value. One of them, very relevant to semiosis, is the object of the axiological hypothesis. I will present this hypothesis next July at the 20th World Congress of the International Association of Applied Linguistics in Lyon, France. Thank you very much. Gracias. Muchas gracias.